Content warning. This episode contains discussion of the sexual abuse of children.
If you've followed our episodes on the Kegan Kline case, you will surely know how impressed we have been with the work of Miami County Deputy Prosecutor Courtney Alwine, who took over the prosecution of that case earlier this year.
In court, she always spoke with an eloquent and intelligent, controlled anger. There were moments during the sentencing hearing where she confronted Kegan Kline that we don't imagine we will ever forget.
But of course, what happened in the courtroom is only part of the story. All of us who have followed this case have been curious to hear the rest. While the case was working its way through the system, however, our only contact with Courtney was to make occasional requests for comments. Requests which she politely and respectfully declined.
Now that the case is over, we were delighted that she agreed to sit down with us for a detailed interview about it all. In this first part, we cover quite a bit of ground, including what she knows about the Delphi murders, when the Miami County Prosecutor's Office was first informed about the case, why 5 of the charges were dropped, what it's like to work with Vito, and why she thinks Kegan pleading guilty was a smart strategic move.
In our next episode with Courtney, we will cover the rest of the story of Kegan Kline's case, and we'll also get her thoughts about the references to a second user of the Anthony Shots account.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases.
We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is The Delphi Murders, a conversation with Kegan Kline prosecutor Courtney Alwine. Part 1, Before the Guilty Plea.
Before we begin our conversation with Courtney, we'd like to quickly remind you of some of the names of people in this case. For most of the time since his arrest, Kegan Kline was represented by defense attorney Andrew Aki. Kline ultimately asked for Aki to be removed, and so at the sentencing hearing, he was represented by Eric Honeyegger and William Berkshire. Courtney, thank you so much for being with us here today. Can you start out by just telling us a bit about your background and your legal career?
Absolutely. Thank you guys both for having me on. So I have been an attorney for just over 6 years at this point. I'm from Peru, Miami County. When I was in law school, I interned at the Miami County Prosecutor's Office for 2 summers, which taught me a lot. I think the beauty of an internship like that is you figure out very quickly whether this is something that you like or don't like. Right. And I think with this, I knew very quickly that this was something that I was meant to be doing. So I graduated from McKinney School of Law here in Indianapolis and started working at the Miami County Prosecutor's Office in Indianapolis. Then I had interned there as well. And then I started working at Miami County in September of 2017. So that's kind of the background of where I came from. Working in that office has been a really incredible experience. I've learned so much you wouldn't necessarily think that in a small county we would have so much opportunity for experience and growth, but we really do. And we have a really solid team. It's really nice to work with the people that I get to work with. Jeff Sinkovics, who is my boss, has been a great mentor and friend for the last 7, 8, 9 years at this point. And we're super blessed to be where we are.
One thing I just thought of, can you describe Miami County for folks who may not be super familiar with that part of Indiana? What's it like being there? What is the place like?
It's a small town. I think when you go into Peru, it's very quaint. Everyone is really nice. Like, I can't go out to lunch without someone saying hello at some point, which is a really nice place to be. You don't get that too many places. We have just a community, I think. This is the community that raised me, and it was important to me then when I came back that I fought for that community in the way that I can. And so, it's very, I think, family oriented. I know you guys have visited the circus. So, there's a lot of different events between just throughout the year. And it's just, the people are great.
Yeah, we absolutely love Peru, and that friendliness is something Kevin and I have experienced, even though we don't live there. It's very, very nice.
Very welcoming community.
It's very welcoming.
Well, let's get this out of the way early. Can you explain your knowledge, if any, of the Delphi case?
I figured this was coming pretty early. So I'm sure nobody is going to believe this when I say it, but I really know very little about Delphi. You two probably know more than I do, to be totally honest. When we came into the Kline case, there was a conversation pretty early on about how we were going to keep things pretty separate. So as far as state police were concerned, they are handling the Delphi case, they are handling the Kline CSAM case, and we were on a need-to-know basis. So in all reality, I know very little. From a big picture perspective, I think that ended up working for us because, as I'm working on this case, I'm not thinking so much about Delphi or any potential connection that may or may not exist because I don't know about it, and that's not my priority. I have this case that is horrible, to put it lightly, on its own merit. And I have victims in this case who I am here to fight for. And so it ended up working really well to keep a bit of a separation. I think it kept us hyper-focused on our case without being too overwhelmed or making decisions that were clouded based on other factors. So, yeah, I really know very little.
And then just from a legal perspective, why is that focus so important? And why would it be sort of inappropriate to be making decisions in the Kegan Kline case based on possible connections to Delphi?
Well, I think you could very easily fall into that trap of, trying to prosecute someone for basically the wrong reasons or the wrong crime. And, it'd be one thing if, let's say we're investigating someone who's a suspect in a homicide and we find, maybe a little bit of pot, a little bit of meth. And if we treated that, we're going to give you the maximum on this marijuana charge because we think you're involved in this murder, but we can't prove it. That's not right. And we shouldn't be doing that. We should really be treating each case on its own merit. I think, if you're in a jury trial, and we're going through evidence, we can't talk about a person's prior criminal history with a jury because, we don't want to influence them. We don't want to say, well, he's done this before, so he's done this time. You have to really focus it on, did this person do this thing on this date, at this time, in this place? It's not about using their prior bad acts, basically. And so kind of for our own purposes, I think we took it from that same concept. Now here we had a very serious crime in and of itself where there was a lot to work with. It's not like we're, overblowing it. There's so much here. It's so complex. It's so complicated. It's so overwhelming. It's so horrible that it's bad enough on its own. We don't need to tack anything else onto it. We're trying to find the most appropriate sentence for what he did, and keeping Delphi as a barrier, I think, helps because then we can focus on things. And I know in my heart of hearts that what we did was proper. And I will never lose sleep over that. I will never worry that maybe I was influenced by something else, because I don't have that information to have been hung up on.
I'm interested in going back to the beginning of your involvement with this case. How did you come to get involved with this case?
So in June of 2020, we were contacted by the state police. They wanted to set up a meeting with us. So myself, Jeff Sinkovics, and Peter Diedrichs met with a team of several members, and they sat us down and said, look, this is, in essence, this is what we have. Would you take a look at it? Would you file this? And so we talked it through with them, and then we said, absolutely. If you've got it, we're going to take it. So that began the journey that's lasted the last 3 years. There was a lot that needed done in that short period of time between June and his arrest in August. A lot of making sense of the charges, Dave Vito putting together his probable cause affidavit, figuring out where Kegan was and what he was doing to be able to get a search warrant if we needed it, to get an arrest warrant, making sense of all of the data to come up with the charges that we were going to file. That was a very complex period.
You said you had to figure out where he was. Why was that a challenge in this case?
So I think it was Dave Vito who testified about this at the sentencing hearing, but one of the big issues was that, if you went on Kegan Kline's Facebook page, he was in Vegas, he was on Warped Tour, he was everywhere. If you were looking at his social media, he was purporting himself to be this, very well-traveled musician. As it turns out, he was staying at his girlfriend's apartment, and that was in her name. So there also wasn't anything tying his name to an address. It took some time for law enforcement to figure out where he was, and then to basically sit on that residence and confirm, yes, that's where he is. He's staying there consistently where that's his residence, even though he's not on the lease. That just took some time and effort.
One thing this isn't really a question, I'm just jumping in to say, this is, I just think, important to stress. We heard from Dave Vito at the sentencing hearing, that he was not on this case in 2017 when Kegan first came on the radar, and neither were you.
Right.
And so, the people who were on this in 2017 are not the same people who were on it later when charges came down. And so I'm just throwing that out. I know a lot of people have had, reasonable questions about why there was that delay, but I think for a lot of the people sort of taking it on later, the goal is to just get it done and not necessarily dig into what exactly happened back then. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, in February of 2017, I was sitting for the bar. I wasn't even an attorney yet. I was trying to, pass that test.
Right.
So a lot of the players that were involved in this to bring this to a close were very much not involved in 2017. So, when this all comes together in 2020, you sit down and the conversation at that point is like, do we have a statute of limitations problem? No, we don't. We're good here on these charges. Do we have the evidence? Are we talking about something where, maybe he's talking to 17-year-olds and that's improper and it's gross, but can we prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? Here, I think you guys know, we had a lot worse than that. So those questions were pretty easily answered. And at the end of the day, I think the conversation that we're having with ourselves is, so what do? You either take your lumps and deal with it, or you let them walk. And we're not willing to let someone like this walk. If we had a jury trial on this was something, like I said, I hadn't even taken the bar exam yet when all of this was coming. But I was going to have to fall on the sword and take that on in a jury trial and say, look, yes, there's this delay, but we got it done. And the reality is that I can't make the facts any better than they are. I can't make up stuff, and I wouldn't. That's not how this works. But you are dealt with the hand that you're dealt with, and then you have to just deal with it. And so I think if you really look at what was happening in 2020, and if you were in those rooms and part of those conversations, it was full force, full steam ahead. We were working just so hard to figure out how this was going to fit together. I mean, it was so much that Jeff and Peter were coming in to the office to work on this on Father's Day. So if you want to put into perspective about how quickly we were trying to get this put together, that I think that single fact, which is just one of many, that's what we were trying to do.
That's incredible. And I think I interrupted you earlier when you were talking about how you got involved with the case.
At the time, it was a potential that it would have been in the court that I was in, or I think there were some things where I may have been prosecuting it, Jeff may have been prosecuting it, and there's some questions about where it's going to land. I also had some other experience with similar type cases. And so that meeting with the three of us going, it was just, the elected, the chief deputy, and then I tagged along because maybe I would have something to add. I was just kind of there. So out of the gate, Peter Diedrichs, who's our chief deputy, was going to be the lead. I was going to be his second chair. We both are very tech savvy and understand technology a lot. So I think that was kind of the intention behind the two of us taking this on, was to have us have a little bit of a step ahead. We don't have to figure out all of the tech side of things. We already understand that. And so my being there was really in more of an assistance kind of role. So I would be really busy with the case in different pockets of time. Like when we're trying to put the charges together, we're working really hard as a team. And then there would be times where I would kind of be in the background because, I had jury trials going on. I had other things. At that time, it was Peter's case. So you're handling this. I've got other stuff going on. If you don't need my help, I'll be here when you need my help. But yeah, that's how I got involved in the beginning.
And then when did you ultimately become the lead on the case?
It was January 24th of this year. Our office had 4 attorneys for a very long time. And on January 1st, we were blessed with having a 5th attorney. So at that time, we're reorganizing a lot of different, who handles what kinds of cases. At this point, this case had been pending for quite some time. This case having so much attention puts a lot of pressure on a small office, and we can handle it. We're going to get the job done just like we would any other case. But I think at a certain point, you just want to get it closed. And so, in January, when I took this over, Jennifer Kiefer, who started in our office in January, she was going to be my second. And really, I think if you boil it all down, it was, I took this over to take this to trial. That was kind of the goal at that point. We didn't want any more continuances. We didn't want to push this out. I had been on it for long enough. So we were rearranging a lot of things. But ultimately, Jen and I were the trial team that was going to really push this to get to some closure. We did not want this to be continued any more than it needed to be.
One thing we were curious, and you mentioned about how horrible this case is, and we want to make sure that doesn't get lost in all of this. But I'm wondering, can you speak about that, and also what it was like to work on this from an emotional perspective for you?
This case, gosh, it's really hard to describe. I don't think there are words in the human language to describe this case. I don't think there's really adequate language to describe the emotional toll. I listened to your episode on the sentencing hearing, and one of the things that you guys talked about was just, it was a hard hearing to sit through and listen to. And I had some family members that were in attendance, kind of created a buffer right behind me. They were there, and I know it was hard for them to listen to. And there's a weird sense of realization at some point that if it's that hard to listen to, how hard is it to exist in it? And to exist in it over and over and over again. And for 3 years, I never really let myself think about that, because this is the job. This is the work. This is what I'm here to do. And, you know, a mentor of mine, someone who I have a great deal of respect for, described what we do as, we wear the cape and we stand in between a bully and a victim. And we say, not today. And I remember the first time that I heard her give that speech and just being really overwhelmed and thinking, wow, that's a really powerful way of thinking about it. And that's how I've viewed this case for the last 3 years. And I still do in some ways. And I still, today looking back at it all and think, what an honor, what an absolute honor it was to be the one who got to wear that cape. But boy, having it over, there is a wave of realization of how difficult that is and how much it messes with you from an emotional kind of standpoint. And, we're tough. We are in law enforcement. We're seeing the worst of the worst. We are not meant to see things like this. As human beings, as healthy human beings, we are not made to see these kinds of things. And I think this case is going to take me some time to get over. I think it's going to take all of us who were involved some time to get over. It's overwhelming. But it's the work, and it's good work. It is just work. It's important work. And like I said, it's an honor to be the one who actually did that. Yeah, the content that we're talking about, I've heard, not directly, but, through people, I've heard that there have been some people who thought, wow, 43 years for a child porn case, that seems excessive. That has to be because of Delphi. That has to be because of this. That has to be because of this. And I can confidently tell you that if you feel that way, then you don't know a thing about this case. Because if you did, you'd be saying 43 years isn't enough, but it's all we could do. Tim Spar is a great judge to be in front of. And I can confidently say that he is one of the few people in this world who can look at a room full of media and say, I don't care. I don't care that you're here watching me. I'm going to do what is right. And, if he felt that 10 years of probation was appropriate, he would have issued that sentence and then faced the community and said, his integrity is worth more than that. So there's also that kind of knowing that he has also seen it and viewed it that way. For me, gosh, we're not just talking about the possession of these horrible, horrible images. We're talking about the solicitation, that he solicited these children, that he was exploiting them, that he was distributing these images, that he was, I think one of the things that I've heard in a roundabout way as well, he wasn't creating child pornography. And no, he wasn't in that traditional sense. He didn't have a video camera and he didn't have a child and he wasn't, creating them in that way. But there was some pseudo creation here, and we can't forget that. He's soliciting these images from these girls, pretending to be someone else. And then he's taking, screenshots of the Snapchat images that are coming in. He's saving the images that are being sent to him and then recycling them to pretend to be Emily Ann or sending them to other pedophiles. So I think one of the things that we need to consider is the definition of creation is changing. Technology is changing, and we have to follow suit. This is no longer the day of, finding a box of Polaroids and charging those. It is just rampant. And the internet has made it so much easier for people to perpetuate these crimes. And then, the added layer of the content of these images. One of the things that I said in the sentencing hearing was, having topless selfies of 14, 15-year-olds is awful. And we would be disgusted to find that his phone was full of those. But that's not the only thing we found. We found videos. We found videos of preteens. We found videos of children. And when I say children, I'm saying as young as toddlers. A couple of the images, a video of a little girl that between 3 and 5 years old, a known image, I believe from out of Germany, another video out of West Virginia with a girl maybe 5 or 6 years old. Another video that was taken, we believe, in a South Asian country. That little girl's probably 9. And these are videos, and they are graphic. They're so graphic that I don't know that I should even describe them on your podcast, other than just saying that's what they are. They're videos that, just sitting here today and giving that little thing that it's playing in my mind. I'll never forget them. I'll never forget the looks on their faces. And more frighteningly, the absence of any look on their faces, and it's a toddler who in this video, there's no reaction. And so you think about that, think, God, this isn't the first time that this has happened. It's not the second, the third, the fifth, the 10th, the fifth. I mean, this is happening so often. This is normal. That is what we're talking about. It is horrible. And that's not even talking about the communications, the text messages, the conversations between him and hundreds of victims. That's just the images.
It's truly horrific. I've always thought about, I think reporting on this case has always made us feel kind of sick. And that's as people on the outside as media who are just reporting on it. We're not seeing anything. And how do you, I don't know, how do you in law enforcement deal with that and, kind of keep focused on working towards justice, even though that's really difficult to see?
I don't know that there's a good answer for you. I think before the sentencing hearing, I would have told you, well, for me, I'm really good at compartmentalizing. So, I can do this work and focus on what needs to be done. And then I can just push it way deep down and not deal with it until I need to deal with it again. And that's a lot of, I think, denial and a lot of protecting yourself, right? Because I can't break down and lose it. I have a job to do. And if I can't be my best and do my best work and put my best foot forward, then I am not doing this case justice. I am not doing these girls justice. I am the only one who can do this for them. I am the only one who can fight this fight. And so I don't get to. I have to be the one who stands up and says, I got it. We should all probably be in a good deal of therapy. That's probably the actual answer. I know, I don't ever want to work one of these cases again. If I have to, I'm going to. I've learned a lot. I'll be even better the next time. I think, I've talked to Vito and he said the same thing. He said, I don't ever want to work one of these cases again. But you just have to do, you have to do it. 'Cause these are some of the most important cases that we work on. It's not fun, but you gotta.
One thing you talked about in court during the sentencing hearing was that there were untold hundreds, if not thousands, of victims, and it's difficult to identify them. Can you talk about the number of victims and the challenges you and law enforcement faced in identifying them?
I would estimate, I think if I said there were hundreds of victims, I think that is underestimating it. I think there's no question that there were thousands. He was doing this all day, every day, just consistently. We were able to identify, I think, 11 victims. I think that's the number. One of those victims came forward after the Anthony Shots press release. That victim, we talked about them in court. We identified that person as T, just so you guys know who I'm talking about. That person came forward because they had seen the Anthony Shots press release. The rest of the victims that we found, and that's 10 out of thousands. Basically what they were doing is they would take one of the images that we had and crop it around just her face, crop out any of the CSAM and just crop it so it's just a picture of her face. And basically I think the easiest way to describe it is like a Google reverse image search and see if they could find any social media images that looked similar to this girl. The other thing that they could do is, and this is probably the biggest reason why it's so hard. I mean, his target audience is like 12 and 13-year-olds. So think about the usernames that you were picking when you were 12 or 13, like Lil Basketball Star 473. There's nothing about those usernames that's readily identifiable. There were some where they were using their first and last name. And so for those, you can try to find them. But then, if your name is like John Smith, that's a very common name. So then you have all of these different barriers. So we were able to identify, I believe, 11 victims ourselves in conversations we've had with Chris Cecil, who's commander at ICAC. He basically has said, every time I touch this case, I find something more. So it never ends.
During the time you worked on this case, you had the unenviable task of probably learning more about Kegan Kline than anyone else on this planet. What are your general impressions of him and his methods of manipulation?
Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty good assessment, Kevin. I would say that Dave, Vito, and I probably are the two people who know this case the best at this point, forwards and backwards. Kegan Kline is a master manipulator. He lies frequently. He's a bit of a pathological liar. It's all of the time. In looking at, some of the conversations he's had with people, he just constantly there's always some motive. There's always something he's trying to get. And when we're looking at the messages on his devices, and this goes clear back to 2011 when he was 17, clear up until, the conversations that he's having with women or even with you, up until, a couple weeks ago when he was still in the Miami County Jail. We're just seeing so many patterns of the same behaviors, the same kind of statements from him. The interview that you did with him, well, I guess I should back up a little bit. When you're in jail, you have the ability to have video visitation with your friends, family members, phone calls, and then chirps, which are basically text messages between everyone. And all of those are recorded. You, as an inmate, you sign off understanding that everything is recorded, everything is kept track of. And there are people with the sheriff's department who monitor those, for obvious reasons. I also have access to all of that. So I can go through everyone's chirps, everyone's phone calls, everyone's video visits. And of course, you're not going to monitor everyone's everything all of the time because that would be multiple full-time jobs. But on some cases, you do. And so on this case, I know Dave Vito has seen 95% of all of the communications. I would say I've seen 95% or more of all of the communications. So I know more about Kegan Kline than I ever want to. I'm ready to stop thinking about Kegan Kline. He just manipulates everyone all of the time. I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouths, but I think there's this experience when you're talking to him and watching your most recent interview after the sentencing hearing with him, when he talks, he comes off as incredibly believable. And like, he kind of comes off as genuine. And, you guys could talk about your experience with that, but I'm watching that, I think it was a Saturday, after the sentencing hearing or something. I'm watching it from home. And some of the things he's saying are just bold lies that I know to be bold lies because I've seen it. And he still comes off as believable. And so, if he's believable to us as adults, imagine how easily he can manipulate these children who are the most vulnerable among us. It's really frightening.
Yeah, I would say from our perspective, he has a tone of like imminent, reasonable sort of authenticity. That's, I think we've been talking to him when we realize certain things of that's definitely not true, but it's actually pretty incredible because you don't necessarily expect that from him, given what he's charged with.
Right.
But it makes sense because you'd have to be good at manipulation in order to get all these kids to do this sort of thing.
If you could read his chirps, that means obviously you were reading all the chirps he was sending back and forth with these women discussed in court who were basically sexting him in hopes of getting information about the Delphi case. Well, do you have any comments about any of that?
I have lots of comments about that, most of which I probably shouldn't say on the record about my opinions or my general feelings about his sexting. Gosh, it was just bizarre and repulsive and so frequent all the time. And it was happening even before he was in the public sphere, because before the Anthony Shots press release, there was nothing. If you Googled his name, there was not a single anything. And so at that point, he was getting girls' numbers either through other inmates. Like let's say, Anya, you and I are in jail. Sorry.
It's bound to happen at some point.
Bound to happen. So your chirp dies and I say, here, you can use mine to text Kevin. And then you text him, say, yeah, my chirp's dead. I'll text you tomorrow. Well, then the next tomorrow, then I have Kevin's phone number in my chirp. So that's one of the things he was doing. He would get these random girls and then he would from those kinds of things and then start texting them. I think he was also getting them just from other people's phones or other inmates, I think, were giving him some. And he was just getting very lewd very quickly. And then he's very persistent, even when they don't respond. Once he went public, he had women coming to him, and there was very much a quid pro quo kind of conversation going of, if you entertain this, then I'll give you information that may or may not be true. It got pretty graphic. There's a lot of specific things that, I would read them and then I would send a text to Dave Vito and be like, you need to update yourself on his chirps because there's just things that are coming up. It was pretty wild. Judge Spar actually read one of the chirps when he was delivering the sentence, and he remarked that it was one that no one had testified to or addressed. And I was surprised that he did so. But in this specific chirp, Kegan had made a comment about he had texted this woman, and this is very much paraphrasing. I don't have it in front of me, but said something along the lines of like, what if when your husband's at work, you came home and I was there and tied you up and did X, Y, and Z. And Judge Spar read that because that was something that was profound to him. And that is just, honestly, that's kind of mild for a lot of the stuff that he was saying back and forth. And, his attorney had made a comment about, well, this is all coming from women who are adults. Like, he's not doing this with children while he's in the jail. Absolutely correct. What was important for a lot of that to come in at the sentencing hearing was twofold. One, look, you're being recorded. We can all see all of this, and that we are. And yet you're still doing this. And it's so graphic. It's the exact same behaviors where he's going from 0 to 100 really, really quickly. And the content of what he's saying is really graphic. It's not, I don't mean to yuck anyone's yum, but it is, this isn't just like, I've got a thing for this thing. It's just really graphic. And more importantly, from a sentencing hearing perspective, it's the exact same stuff that he was saying to these children. The exact same phrasing, the exact same kind of high points, the exact same issues, talking about gangbangs, just between us, no one will know. I don't know. There were so many direct phrases that I feel like were just copied and pasted throughout all of these conversations over, 10, 12 years.
Yeah, it gives the impression of someone who's either unwilling to or unable to stop doing what they're doing.
Absolutely. I don't think he's able to, because he doesn't view he has a problem. It's I don't think there's any way that he could, because he doesn't think there's an issue.
Was there ever a point when you tried to make some sort of a deal or a plea bargain with Kegan?
Not me. When I took this over on January 24th, the first phone call I made was to Dave Vito to say, I'm taking the case. We're set for trial in May. We're going to rock and roll. Let's get this done. I'm going to be calling you a lot. We've got a lot of work to do. The second call that I made was to Andrew Rocky, and I told him that day, in no uncertain terms, there will be no deal. I'm calling you to let you know that I am now the lead. If you need anything, let me know. We're set for trial. We're going to go to trial. I'm going to object to any continuance, and I'm not going to give you any deal. Now, there were some conversations in some of the earlier eras, some talks about plea agreements being hashed out. I think there were some conversations about cooperation, if there was any. That never really went anywhere. I think there's just a lot of, like, I don't really, to be honest, I don't really know a lot of that. That was all happening with when I was kind of more in a background role. Of course, I'm a little, we would have conversations about it, and, what should we do? Should we do this? Should we do this? And my perspective that I always said was like, look, if you guys have been doing this longer than I have and are much more mature than I am, I want to have a trial, because, like, I want to wield the hammer. But I recognize that that may not always be the best strategy, the best thing that we can do. And so if, when we're looking at this, this is the right move at the right time, then, I'm on board. By the time we got to January of this year, that's done. Like, there's no movement here. We're not getting anywhere. We're just like, I'm not going to offer a plea. And at that point, I think my perspective was every single day that I can put Kegan Kline in prison is worth every minute, every hour, every day that I'm working on this case. It's worth it. I'd rather lose a count in trial than dismiss anything. And to be frank, we wouldn't have. I mean, this case is a really well investigated case. Factually, it's really solid. If we went to trial, we would have gotten a conviction on all 25 counts. So I was not willing to budge. And I will give Andrew Rocky the credit that he deserves, because he tried. He tried very hard to represent his client in the best way that he could. He tried to get an offer that would be beneficial. And I just, at that point, it was over.
Obviously, plea deals have their place and can be a tool for defense and prosecution to sort of come to some sort of agreement and move on without a trial, which I imagine in some cases is actually preferable. Why in this case, at that point, did you determine basically, no, like, we're not doing this?
I think it's a couple things. For one, this had been pending for 2.5 years at that point. And, you've had conversations with Kegan and you've seen a lot of the things that go on. Like, that guy is just all over the place. And so I just had this feeling that, we're going to go back and forth. If I were to have engaged in plea negotiations, it would have been the kind of thing where it's like, okay, I'll do this. You give me a counteroffer. I say no. We just go back and forth and back and forth. And I had this feeling that if we were negotiating, that, well, what happened is kind of what would have happened there, where it's like, well, if they're willing to dismiss this, then maybe I can push back and say, I'm not going to plead unless I get this. And it's just, I wasn't willing to go too low, because I genuinely feel that he is dangerous and a predator. And I really thought he is someone that we need to, he is someone we need to put away. There is no plea agreement that I will offer that feels right to me, that I can sleep with, that he will also take. So then, at that point, it's like, well, let's set it for trial and get this done. I think he'd also he jerked everyone's chains around so much that it's one of those where I'm not willing to work with you. It's not just that the case is worth all of this. I'm not willing to work with you because I can't trust anything that comes out of your mouth. And he's just a really bad guy. Like, I mean, I don't think that we can hammer that home enough. He's a certified bad dude. And that's like, even with having no criminal history up until this point, he's a really bad dude. And he's someone that we have to remove because he can't be fixed. He's not willing to acknowledge his issues. And so, you know, if he got 10 years and then probation time or whatever, you know, he gets out of prison, he's going to go right back to doing this exact same thing. And maybe then it escalates and he does something worse. Maybe then he actually like hurts a kid. How can you live with yourself if you're the one who let him go? So by the time I got there, I wasn't going to be the one. I wasn't going to be the one to give him a break. I was going to push this for a trial. We wanted it closed. The attention on this creates a lot of pressure, especially on such a small office. I think we were just tired. You know, I mean, this is exhausting. And the longer that it goes on, you're just so ready. It's like you're burnt out on Kegan Kline. You're burnt out on these images. You're burnt out on this fact pattern. I don't want to talk about him anymore. I want to get this done. And so that's where it was. I was not willing to budge on that.
From the outside, one thing that made some people wonder if there was a deal was that at one point, 5 charges were dropped. Mm-hmm. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So as part of the preparation for this case, we had enlisted an expert through Riley Children's Hospital in Indianapolis. And we met with her, sat down, went through all of the images in the videos. And basically, I mean, we had probable cause to file all of those counts. You know, when we looked at them and said, oh, that looks like someone under the age of 18. And CSAM is one of those things where you know it is when you know what it is when you see it. You know, there's not really much of a test, but you just know. When you see that image, you know what you're looking at. To prove it in court beyond a reasonable doubt, we do need more than that. We can't just put it up and say, well, she looks under 18 to me. Doesn't she to you? We need something more. So we enlisted help from someone at Riley and basically went through all of the images and said, based on your background, can you estimate the age of this child? And they're looking at things like, you know, breast development of the pubic bone or pubic area, face shape, body shape. You know, they're looking at all of these different kinds of factors. When we did so, there were a few images that we simply weren't able to prove. So, you know, things where we show an image and she would say, well, if you told me that girl was 16, I would believe you. If you told me she was 20, I would believe you. Because there's just at a certain point in development, it just blurs. It's not an exact science. There was one image that was known malware. So, you know, he may have had that from getting it intentionally. But because we know that it's malware that is put on people's phones or devices, you know, that's a defense. We're going to give the benefit of the doubt on that. The other kind of point in that, there's a point of diminishing return. You know, if we just file more and more possession counts, we're not going to get any more prison time. We're not going to get any longer of a sentence. So with those, it's one of those things where it's like, well, we can't prove it, and it's not really going to change the overall sentence. But the biggest thing with those 5 counts, like I said, the one was malware. The other 4, we just couldn't prove them. We did not have the evidence to be able to say, yep, that is a child under 18.
And the other thing that made some people wonder if there was a deal, this was well before you took over the case. I don't even know if you can speak to this. I believe it was in August, Kegan Kline's attorney filed something saying, oh, we're working on a deal, and then we have the Wabash River search. Is there anything about that you can speak to?
So that was around the time that I was off work. My daughter was born last summer. And so there was a lot of time that I was off, or I was only coming to work on days that I had to be in court and working from home a lot. So I was kind of on the outs on a lot of that. Up until around that time, I think the potential of a deal was still possible. I don't think there was anything concrete. So I don't want to say like, yes, there was a deal. But up until around that point, I think, the right circumstances, there could have been an agreement. It wasn't until really around the turn of the year that shifted to where we were saying, as an office, we're done. We're not, there's no deal. We're not doing this. We're gonna try this thing. So I would say that there was nothing concrete, but there was still potential. I know in one of the motions after I did take this over, there was mention of negotiations. There wasn't. I think that was just a simple clerical error. You have forms that once you draft a motion to continue, you just change the date and then send the same one. So I don't think there was anything, improper about any of that. I think if anything, it was just a mistake reusing an old form.
Courtney is referring here to a motion which defense attorney Andrew Aki filed on March 20th, 2023. It read in part, quote, "The parties have negotiated a proposed resolution in this cause of action," unquote. A little more than an hour after Aki's motion, Courtney filed her response, which read in part, quote, "The parties have not negotiated a proposed resolution in this cause of action," unquote. As she says, she wanted it on the record that she had not negotiated any sort of a deal with Kegan Kline. She imagines that Aki's error was an innocent one just because he was reusing an old form while preparing his filing.
If you've drafted this motion, why are you going to create it from scratch when you have the template there? And so, I don't know. I never asked him. I just was like, nope. I didn't want there to be any confusion in the record because that's not what we were doing. But no, I don't think there was anything intentional at all.
I'm also curious, after the sentencing hearing, you talked about the team, people like Jen Kiefer, and of course, not part of the prosecution office, but Dave Vito. These are people you worked with. Can you talk a little bit about them and what it was like to work with them?
Absolutely. Gosh, we had a really good team on this case. Jennifer Kiefer started working in our office in January, and she and I think are quite the pair. We just had this conversation the other day, and she was like, I don't think that you and I should work very well together, but we work really well together. And I think it's like sometimes we just are so similar in the way that we view things that sometimes you can butt heads when it's like you're too similar. But we work really well together, and she has become a really valuable asset to our office. When she came on, she had some experience working in Tippecanoe County and had worked with sex crimes quite a bit. So she's a lot of experience in this realm. And she was going to be my second chair, work with me on this because she has that background. And so one of the things that was really helpful was she didn't read the case. She didn't have any of the information. I could just talk to her and spin some ideas. And she could tell me what she was hearing without any of that other knowledge and just tell me what I'm missing. Tell me what I need. Tell me this, tell me that. She also was able to just carve out certain pieces of this and take it off my plate. The Kiefer brief, which I think you guys called it the Kiefer brief. And I think that is the funniest thing. So I'm taking that on and I'm running with that. But for her to put that together and just take that off my plate was massive, because that's, for one, she's a much better legal writer than I am. And so, you want to play to your strengths when you're working as a team. For two, it was really nice to say, basically, we're set for this change of plea. We're set for this sentencing hearing, but I need to focus on getting all of this together. Can you just take this and do the legal research and put together the brief so I don't have to focus on that? And that's something that we can just carve out, and I can focus here, you can focus there. And she did so brilliantly. She had a couple great points in there. The point that if he had committed these crimes just 2 months later, they all would have been crimes of violence. And I was just like, gosh, that is so important to note. That just the virtue of 2 months means he got a lighter sentence than he would have if this happened, 2 months later. So she was just the absolute best person that I could have had here. For her, when we were preparing for trial and dividing up the witnesses, it was to give her Chris Cecil and say, this is going to be highly technical and kind of its own carve out. So that's an easy thing because it's something you can take on and make yours. And then when he pled guilty and when we're going to sentencing hearing, it was like, if you're busy, I don't mind doing it. But if you want to, bring it home. Let's get this done. And so, yeah, she has ended up being just the best teammate that I could have had for this. We've got a trial that we're doing in like 2 weeks that we're splitting pretty well in half. So it'll be our 5th trial plus Kline for the year. The two of us are just having a weirdly busy year. So we're just having a lot of fun and getting a lot of work done. But yeah, she's great to work with. To look at Dave Vito, he is really talented. He and I think hit it off very early on where we just saw eye to eye. There are those people that you meet, and when you meet them and you're working with them, it's just, you get it. You both see the facts and you're kind of seeing them in the same light. And I think we both had that. We're both pretty young. And so for us to be younger and involved in this case that's very big, and to just be like, well, we're diving in and holding on and we're going to get this done. I really enjoyed working on this with Dave. He and I would just brainstorm a lot, in preparing for the sentencing hearing. There were things where we would sit down and say, I have this idea. And then he would talk about, he thought about it, and then it would build these points until finally, we'd be talking about something for 20 or 30 minutes. And then all of a sudden we'd have it boiled down into like that one point, that one zinger that we're going to land at the sentencing hearing. And so, he was great. I am incredibly proud of the work that he did on this case. He just knows it so well. There were things where I could say, a year and a half ago, you mentioned this detail and I can't find it anywhere, but I know you mentioned that. And he would just be able to, at the drop of a hat, pull it and say, yeah, this is what it is. This is where you can find it. Do you have it? Let me get it for you. And so he just had everything in his brain all of the time. He was great to work with.
And of course, all this work was geared towards a trial. And then there's not a trial. He pleads guilty. Were you surprised by that?
I was. It was a really smart strategic move on their part. When you have a case like this where the facts are really good, where, if you go to trial, you're going to lose. You're going to get convicted on all of these counts. What do? And so there's 2 options. You either take it to trial and make the prosecutors prove it and just make them go, make them do it. And a lot of times that's what people will do. And they'll say, I know my guy's going to get convicted, but we got to do what we got to do. In this case, they did the other option. They pled guilty. And by him pleading guilty, he could walk into that sentencing hearing and say, look, I'm owning what I've done. I'm remorseful. I'm taking responsibility for my actions. I'm saving the county the time and expense of a trial. I'm saving the victims from having to come here and testify in court. And basically use that as a mitigating circumstance to say, I should get a lesser sentence. So I was surprised. Even, we were having conversations and knew this was happening before the filings were going into place. But even, when it was filed, even when we were walking in for that change of plea hearing, I don't believe it's happening until it's happened, because you never know if someone's going to change their mind in the final hour. So, the day before the sentencing or the change of plea hearing, I'm still preparing for trial. It surprised me, but it was a smart strategic move.
In our next episode, we will continue the story and cover all the twists and turns that came up in the case after Kegan Kline's guilty plea.
We'd like to thank Courtney for being so generous with her time. Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.